But we still often believe that money operates in a simple and understandable way. Yet behind what we see lies an entire system of hidden rules. Rules that quietly determine who gets the chance to become wealthy and who will fall behind, who can move ahead and who is forced to stand outside the game. If you don't understand these rules, you'll forever be playing a game in which all the rules were set long before you entered, even before you had the chance to sit at the table. You're always behind, without ever understanding why you lose. Money operates on ancient principles, deeply rooted in history, principles most of us were never taught. Yet they quietly influence and shape nearly every aspect of each person's life. In this video, we will explore the rules that have shaped how money behaves for thousands of years, from diluted silver coins in ancient Rome to the sophisticated financial instruments used by modern nations today. Let's begin with the most basic and also the most ruthless rule, Gresham's Law. In the 1500s, Sir Thomas Gresham explained this law to Queen Elizabeth. In a famous statement, bad money drives good money out of circulation. The principle is actually very simple. When two forms of currency circulate together, one trusted and one debased or diluted and devalued, people naturally choose to spend the bad money and keep the good money for themselves. Take ancient Rome as an example. When the silver denarius began to be mixed with cheaper metals, people were not fooled. They used the newly debased coins to pay taxes and settle debts, and kept the pure silver ones hidden away. The same happened in medieval Europe. When kings shaved coin edges or replaced gold with cheaper metals, the lesson is clear. Whenever rulers deliberately reduce the value of money, people immediately adapt. They spend the bad money and save the real money. And once that cycle begins, trust in the currency erodes until it eventually collapses. But there is a second rule, almost like the ruthless sibling of the first, Thiers' Law, named after Adolphe Thiers of France in the 19th century. This rule points out that, in moments of true collapse, the behavior of money flips entirely. In a crisis, good money drives bad money out of circulation. Imagine Germany during Weimar, in the 1920s, when prices doubled within days. Money lost value so fast that people had to fill an entire wheelbarrow with cash just to buy a loaf of bread. And worse, if they arrived just a few hours late, that same money might not be enough anymore, because prices had risen again before they reached the counter. In such a situation, no one wanted to hold the German mark even for a second. People rushed to convert it into gold-backed dollars, cigarettes, or anything that still held real value. Some even returned to bartering goods directly, as long as they could get rid of a currency, losing value by the hour. Similar events happened in Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and countless other cases of hyperinflation. Thiers' Law describes the moment when a monetary system completely snaps, when people lose all trust in the state's promises, and collectively look for any way to escape the currency. Gresham describes how money decays slowly over time, while Thiers describes its sudden death. So what happens in the space between these two extremes? When money hasn't fully collapsed, but has already begun to lose serious value, that is when the Cantillon effect appears. A rule that explains why inflation always feels unfair to most people, and more harmful to those lower in the economic hierarchy. Richard Cantillon, an Irish-French economist living in the early 18th century, discovered something crucial. When new money enters an economy, it never reaches everyone equally. Those closest to the source, governments, banks, and the elite, are always the first to use that money. By the time the new money reaches workers and savers, prices in the market have already risen. Early recipients can buy assets and goods at yesterday's prices, while late recipients must pay tomorrow's prices. The Cantillon effect explains why money printing makes Wall Street wealthy while Main Street is left struggling. It explains why monetary easing after the 2008 crash sent stock markets soaring, yet workers' wages barely moved. It explains why stimulus checks quickly evaporated into increasingly expensive grocery bills and rising housing prices. Inflation is not just a monthly number. It is the transfer of wealth from one group to another. And in this game, you're on the winning side. The cruel part is that everything is designed exactly this way. The system pushes benefits upward, while hiding the cost paid by the masses under rising prices. Ordinary people feel something is being taken from them, but they can't see who took it. The Cantillon effect is the invisible intervention embedded in the modern financial system, and it has existed since the first days humans minted metal coins. The wealthy don't just earn more money, they receive money in a completely different way than the rest of society. If the Cantillon effect explains why new money always flows upward, financial repression shows how governments make sure you can never escape that cycle. The term emerged after World War II, when countries faced enormous mountains of debt, but had no easy way to repay them. Raising taxes would anger the public, while declaring default would destroy national credibility. So governments usually chose a more discreet path, keeping citizens trapped in the system and quietly draining their wealth, without anyone noticing right away. Here's how it works. Central banks intentionally keep interest rates extremely low, sometimes even lower than inflation. This means the money you put into savings will almost certainly lose value over time, when measured in real purchasing power. At the same time, capital controls limit the ability to move money abroad or buy alternative assets. People are forced to accept negative real returns, while governments quietly use inflation to lighten their own debt burdens. This is a silent form of taxation, hard to notice on the surface, but extremely destructive in the long run. Fast forward to the modern era, and you'll see similar patterns playing out across the world. In the United States, for interest rates remained near zero for more than a decade after the 2008 financial crisis. The result mirrored what usually happens in similar economies. Savers lost a huge portion of their real value of assets like stocks, and real estate surged for those who already owned them. From 2023 to 2024, interest rates plunged again, and ordinary people watched their savings evaporate as housing and food prices soared. This is not accidental. It is the 21st century version of financial repression. What makes it so effective is that most people don't even realize it's happening. They simply feel life getting harder and harder without knowing why. But these forces don't just affect individuals. Some of them operate on the scale of entire empires, and that's where the Triffin paradox comes in. The trap that every global reserve currency eventually faces. In the 1960s, Belgian-American economist Robert Triffin testified before the US Congress, warning of a fatal flaw. At the heart of the Bretton Woods system, if the US dollar was to remain the world's reserve currency, the United States would have to supply enough dollars to fund and sustain all global trade. That meant the US would be forced to run persistent trade deficits, spending more abroad than it earned, so that the rest of the world had enough dollars to circulate. In the short term, this system worked well. The world trusted the dollar, and global trade expanded. But in the long run, the system became unstable. The more dollars the US supplied globally, the weaker the link between dollars and eroding trust in the entire system. Triffin's warning came true in 1971, when President Richard Nixon ended the gold standard and turned the dollar into a pure fiat currency. From that moment, the US ran persistent trade deficits, exporting dollars in exchange for goods produced elsewhere. Factories left America, debt piled up. Yet the dominance of the dollar kept the system running. The paradox is this: to maintain global reserve currency status, the US must sacrifice the health of its domestic economy. It is a rule of money, whose end result is almost always long-term decline, like many major economies. With globally used currencies, the US consumes more than it produces and maintains through continuous borrowing. This mechanism strengthens financial markets, but creates imbalances that stretch across the entire economy. Today, alternative systems are emerging. China, Russia, and BRICS nations are experimenting with new payment networks, while central banks worldwide are increasing gold reserves at the fastest pace in 50 years. These shifts don't mean the dollar will be replaced immediately, but they show a clear trend. The world is diversifying its stores of value and its monetary systems. These movements are not yet a sign that the dollar is about to be dethroned, but they reflect a global effort to increase diversification and build more resilience into the financial system. The reserve currency framework that granted the US immense power is now revealing its structural weaknesses. This is the essence of the Triffin paradox. A reserve currency is both a strategic advantage and a long-term burden. If the Triffin paradox shows that the global system is trapped, Goodhart's law explains why attempts to control that system often make things worse. In the 1970s, economist Charles Goodhart noticed something seemingly simple but deeply destructive. When a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. In the 1970s, the economist Charles Goodhart noticed something that seemed simple, yet was profoundly destructive. When a measure is turned into a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Governments and central banks have always loved numbers: 2% inflation, 5% unemployment, 3% GDP growth. These indicators are supposed to reflect reality, but once politicians become determined to hit those numbers at all costs, they end up distorting the very system those numbers were meant to describe. Take inflation targeting, for example. For decades, central banks have promised to keep inflation around 2%. It sounds reasonable, but to achieve that target, they interfered with interest rates, pumped liquidity into the economy, and unintentionally inflated asset bubbles. On paper, inflation looked low and stable, but housing costs, healthcare, and education were rising far faster. Official figures claimed everything was stable, but real life was screaming that it wasn't. Or take GDP. Politicians treat it as the ultimate measure of national progress. But when growth becomes a target instead of a result, governments start borrowing more and more, offshoring manufacturing, and inflating bubbles just to keep that number going up. The result is an illusion of prosperity, while the underlying reality is fragile. Goodhart's law exposes this trap. When you try to control the numbers, you stop measuring the truth. And eventually, we arrive at the seventh rule in this journey: the law of diminishing returns on debt. It is neither ancient nor elegant, but it is the brutal arithmetic of our time. In the early stages of growth, debt can stimulate economic expansion. Borrow $1 and you might generate $1 of growth, or even more. But over time, as debt piles up, the returns begin to diminish. A new dollar of debt may produce only 50 cents of growth, then 25 cents, then even less. Eventually, the debt keeps rising while growth stays stuck. The economic engine no longer accelerates, it only groans under its own weight. We are living in that phase. In the United States, public debt has surpassed $30 trillion, and each new borrowing cycle yields increasingly smaller real growth. A trend that is becoming clearer across many highly indebted developed economies. Most of this debt is now being used to keep financial markets functioning, to support governments' long-term obligations, and to maintain the appearance of stability in the system. Yet the nature of this arithmetic never changes. When debt reaches saturation, every major economy will eventually face its inevitable consequences. The Roman Empire debased its coins when territorial expansion slowed. The French monarchy borrowed until it pushed itself to the brink of collapse before 1789. The British Empire was crushed under massive debt after 2 world wars. Today, the States is also showing signs of similar structural strain, not as a prediction of collapse, but as part of a recurring pattern in economic history where major economies often reach a deadlock. When debt grows faster than real value creation, the core principle remains unchanged. Borrowing can delay consequences, but cannot erase them. So when we look at the big picture, what are these laws trying to tell us? That money is not magic. It operates under rigid rules. Like gravity itself, bad money pushes good money out of circulation until the system collapses. Crises force people to flee towards safe assets. New money always enriches a small group first before reaching the masses, and governments resort to financial repression to silently reduce their debt burdens. Reserve currencies eventually hollow themselves out. Indicators, once turned into targets, distort reality, and eventually, debt devours itself. The forgotten laws of money are not abstract theories. They are survival principles. They explain why inflation erodes the value of savings, why wages so often fail to keep up with living costs, and why debts become heavier over time, even as financial markets continue to rise. They also explain why nations can rise on trust, yet become unstable when burdened by excessive debt. These are not random fluctuations. They are the recurring rhythms of financial history. And here is the hardest truth to accept. This game was never designed for you to win. Ordinary people live in transparency, while the elite live behind curtains. You file taxes, they shift assets. You earn wages, they get the money first. You hold cash that keeps losing value, they hold assets that keep appreciating. This system follows its own rules. And if you don't understand them, you will always play blindfolded. History doesn't repeat exactly, but money always follows certain laws. And if you don't understand them, they will crush you in the same way. They crushed countless generations before you. If this journey helped you see money from a new perspective, remember this: understanding these laws is not just knowledge, it is protection. The financial world will not change the rules for any of us, but we can change how we play the game. If you want to see more videos that unravel the hidden systems behind our daily lives, please like, subscribe to Prosperity Pathways, and share this video with those who need this perspective. The next piece of the puzzle is coming, and you definitely don't want to miss it.